Hello, it's Friday, April the 6th, 2018, and you're listening to Amusing Ourselves to Death. And I'm here with...
Cam Sandu.
We're talking about Hervé Falciani,
Yeah.
the Swiss Leaks whistleblower. And after a few minutes, we'll change subjects and start talking about the Daily Mail agenda, as in British passports, Chinese tariffs, and possibly Mark Lewis from Carbon Tracker, from Barclays moving to Carbon Tracker. So Hervé Falciani, what do you know? What's going on? What's the latest?
Well...
Who is he? What's the story?
Many people remember him from a couple of years ago in 2015, the big HSBC story about the Swiss leaks. In Switzerland, HSBC has got this secret vault where they're allowing wealthy individuals to hide their tax. And it's worth, I might be quoting the wrong kind of figures here, but it was worth something like £80 billion, right? What came out of that? We had immunity and impunity for the people who were found as the wealthy clients in that vault, because George Osborne, he always likes to stick up for the little guy. And Hervé fled. Did he flee Switzerland?
Well, what I understand is that in 2007-8 is when he did the handover of the information around then.
The story came out
I was
in
just looking.
2015.
Yeah, I was reading it up, and I think he went to Lebanon with his partner, and they tried to sell the data there. They tipped off the, I think HSBC in Switzerland. And he was basically running around, and eventually it just took so long for it to get out. So apparently he gave it to Lagarde, and Lagarde gave the information to the Greek government, and there's massive outcry in Greece. But it wasn't, as you said, until 2015 that the stories came out. But I think in Spain in 2013, the highest court said, we won't extradite him because he hasn't broken Spanish law.
Right.
And that's sort of one of the last bits. But sorry, as you were saying...
Well, you're right that it was that early on, because remember afterwards it came out that David Cameron had made Stephen Green a lord, who was the director of HSBC. And it turned out that the HMRC would have been given those files about HSBC before they made him a lord. So that shouldn't have really happened. And then 2 years later, Dave Hartnett from HMRC left our tax office to work for HSBC. Right,
okay. So lots of revolving door going on. And from the HSBC perspective, I thought it was really funny the way the story, Panorama 2015, the story comes out. Stephen Green is made to look bad. He's still a lord, by the way. And he resigned from the City UK, who were kind of pushing TTIP and all of that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And this connects up with a letter that you signed recently, doesn't it? What was that letter that you signed?
Well, the Corporate European Observatory do really, really good work with lobbying in the EU. And they sent out a letter to groups like Spinwatch and Transparency UK and us. And it was basically about the fact that there was a consultation going on at the moment about a law being brought into the UK, being adopted by the UK from the EU. And it's a Trade Secrets Act. And basically it's written by corporate lobbyists. And it gives more rights to companies. And if anyone whistleblows about information that they know from being on the inside, from working with them, if journalists who expose information about companies basically now are liable to be sued, to be penalised and to be taken to court. The EU did have some protections. So some of the MPs lobbied for it and they got some protections to help whistleblowers and journalists, but not for the UK. Sam Gyimah is trying to adopt this wholesale with no protections.
Who's Sam?
He's got a few jobs.
Gyimah.
He seems to be working, I think he's in the business, BEIS, Business Energy.
So he's a Tory
Innovation.
MP.
Yeah, he's a Tory MP. And I think he's also got a position in health. So he's doing like a few things.
And he's doing universities as well, isn't he?
He's doing university and education, yeah. So he's got his finger in a few pies. And this law, there's not been much made about it, but essentially it gives corporations more rights and less rights for us to know what the hell is going on.
Okay, so
and during Brexit, that's pretty scary.
Okay, so that means that it's end to all potential for whistleblowers.
Yeah.
Journalists will have even less access to information than they have so far from whistleblowers. And also... Right, okay.
Well, their reasoning as well for why they didn't adopt some of the safeguards that the EU had was because we already have protections for whistleblowers in the UK because we have PIDA, Public Interest Disclosures Act. But as you and I know, we know some whistleblowers who don't seem to be protected by that act. And Nicholas Wilson, who's a HSBC whistleblower, says that there's no point blowing a whistle in this country.
Okay, I'm sure we're going to come back to whistleblowing in general and the whole thing about information. So, and that's sort of what we do. So we could talk about this forever.
Yeah.
I met up with Naomi Colvin from the Courage Foundation a few weeks ago, and she told me that she's interested in whistleblowing because of the work that she's done with Chelsea Manning. But she told me that she's particularly interested in whistleblowing for people who don't actually release information they find at work, but she's interested in the Computer Misuse Act. People who are hackers that find information and then release it into the public domain then get arrested. But actually, a lot of the time, they're on the autistic spectrum, and they are just testing security in order to help improve security, tell people what...
Ethical hackers.
I suppose so, yeah. And she's interested in that kind of thing. So it's quite interesting at this time, the way in which the government deals with information and shuts it down. So Hervé Falciani, apparently, he is... Yeah, so the Spanish court 5 years ago said you can't be extradited. But now suddenly, because there are two Catalan politicians who are in Switzerland, suddenly he's been arrested and they're talking about extraditing. Basically, Spain are breaking the law.
So swapsy.
Yeah, Spain are breaking their own law in order to get political prisoners from Switzerland, Catalans.
And that means that Hervé will probably be the only guy who faces any kind of legal action over that Swiss leak scandal.
Oh, as opposed to the people who are avoiding. Yeah, interesting. Well, I think they did get fined, I don't know if it was 5 or 40 million Swiss francs.
So some
at
pocket
HSBC.
change,
Yeah, so not much for them. Yeah, interesting. Also, I was just thinking about the whole idea of how it's a swap. It's a political prisoner swap. Free movement of data, free movement of prisoners, except, they're not free.
And he's never protected. So was it 3 years down the line since when it came out, since the story came out, and Hervé's now back into a position where he could face
5 years
being sent back to Switzerland.
Yeah, one of the other funny things was that he is apparently being protected by the United Nations. It said so in the Guardian article that I read. And it made me think of the time I met Ian Fraser, and he told me that when he was writing his book Shredded about the Royal Bank of Scotland, the difficulty that he had writing it was breaking the wall of silence, the omerta, the kind of gangster sort of mafia code of silence. And it seems to me that if you've got this Trade Secrets Directive, EU, being adopted by the UK despite Brexit, and so that's a corporate bill of rights. So in a way, what they're saying is, it doesn't matter what the Spanish High Court has ruled. What we're saying is, if you reveal information that is sensitive about corruption, then it doesn't matter what the law is. We're going to extradite you anyway because you've broken the gangster omerta. In that sense, there are no borders. It's almost like what's happened to these Skripal people, where it doesn't matter what country you're in, we're gonna get you.
Yeah, you can't break the omerta. This is the ultimate unwritten rule. And he's being chased for corporate espionage, right? So that's corporate espionage, which I guess would be the same thing that this law will bring in the
trade
UK.
Secrets, yeah. It's what you found out about at work.
You're a spy at a corporation, essentially.
Yeah, so this is quite depressing. I'm not sure. Obviously, we were also thinking of calling this podcast Shook Ones, and this is why we are so shaken. But yeah, should we stop talking about this and start talking about something else?
I'm sure it will come up again, yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, what about this whole China thing that's going on at the moment? The trade war going on. I noticed that someone who used to be Chief Information Officer of Homeland Security wrote an article in the FT, which I didn't completely read, but he was basically saying that there's a Cold War going on in tech between China and the USA, and the main thing is 5G, so the new mobile networks. He's a bit worried about that. But don't Apple have all of their phones made in China by Foxconn? And, so what's the story here? And if he's the ex-Homeland Security person, I'm guessing that means that he's not from the Trump administration. So, all this protectionism versus open borders. Open borders are obviously a thing of the past now when it comes to trade with these kinds of ideas. But I mean, it's also confusing because I was against TTIP. I thought open borders for certain things are bad, as in the regulation of food and stuff like that. But suddenly, I mean, this is making TTIP look great. What's going on? I mean, what do you think about all this? Because we've looked at sort of China, America and tech sort of things before.
Well, yeah, I think there's the trade war that Trump is having. So he's putting all these tariffs on things and he's taking on China. But the stuff that's happening really behind the scenes is what's going on with tech. So you have in China the BAT. So it's, who are the three companies? It's
Alibaba,
Financial.
Tencent,
And who's the one beginning with B?
Baidu.
Baidu, there you go. So you have these three companies that are huge. And obviously in China, they're able to get away with a lot more data harvesting. And they're now possibly much bigger than Apple and all these other American known giants, Amazon, the GAFAM family, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft.
Are we talking about surveillance capitalism with those three in particular? You know how you said the BAT.
Yeah.
Is this a kind of surveillance capitalism in a way? Because
they all are, aren't they?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Fair point.
It's interesting that we've talked about this before, that in China it's this very blatant social credit system that they're proposing will use all your information to rate you on a trustworthiness score. And that's very blatant. And everyone's like, wow, that's disgusting. China, it's horrible. What a threat. What a way to spy on your own population. But in other ways, those same systems exist here. The way that they can use your public profile and your personal traits to make decisions about you. All of that stuff's going on. But China is seen as this place where it's like really extreme. But they seem to get away with it here because we believe that companies must behave better.
Oh, yeah, we don't like to believe that we're being taken for a ride, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Interesting. Who did we meet with yesterday? Because we went to someone's office and interviewed them yesterday, didn't we?
We met the brilliant sociologist Beverly Skeggs, who, I mean, now that the Cambridge Analytica and Facebook story is still rolling out, I mean, there's still lots of really excellent work being done around Facebook at the moment, and some of the stories are gaining new, what's the word? It's kind of stuff that people knew before, and Bev is the perfect example of this. So she basically spent 3 years tracking the trackers, seeing how Facebook was able to track people and use their data.
Browser history.
Yeah, and how they were doing it offline, how they were lying to governments. And she, while she was doing this research, was actually really shocked and had to go back to the respondents and say, do you mind? Because this is way more than we thought was going to be there. And...
So, sorry, people whose Facebook profiles she was studying as part of her sort of experiment study, she then said, oh my God, I know more about you than I thought I would.
Yeah.
Can I actually get permission and tell me yes or no whether or not I can go forward? Okay, so she found out how deeply it penetrates people's lives.
Absolutely. And we went to her last year and we spoke to her about some of her research. And we went to meet her yesterday to talk about how she's feeling with all the stories that have come out now. And she was saying that she felt very vindicated because apparently she visited the Ministry of Justice just before Cambridge Analytica story broke. And she said that lots of people didn't really believe her or take her seriously.
There were 50 people at the presentation she did, which is apparently more than usual.
Yeah.
And she's basically telling them what their bosses are doing, in a way, isn't she?
Yeah.
She's telling them, actually, whenever your civil servants, whenever your bosses want to get voted in, this is what they have to do.
Yeah.
She might not have framed it like that, but she said they didn't believe her.
Yeah. And that she was called like a conspiracy theorist and going over the top. And so it's interesting that Facebook and all these companies have got this kind of layer of trust. Like, we know that our data is being used, and they've just been gaining so much from the fact that people believe that they can't be doing too much with it, right? And things can't be that bad. And yet we're, giving them all of our personal details, and there's all of these ways that they can match that data up. And in fact, Facebook's actions in terms of harvesting that data has been so aggressive. Someone did a great thread of the patents that Facebook has been taking up over the last few years, and they're extraordinary. Stuff to do with watching how your eyes move on the screen and seeing what adverts you respond to, stuff to do with semantics, stuff to do with figuring out your keystrokes, things to do with biometrics. All of that stuff is going on, and it's moving really, really fast. So it's good that we've had this watershed moment, but there's so many levels of this.
In a way, this is just a big advert for the Bev Skeggs interview that we're going to be releasing on Tuesday.
It's so good.
I was sitting in the room. Yeah, it was pretty mind-blowing. I hope that we can just allow the whole thing to go out uncut. With respect to China, so this morning, I think Yuan of the FT, she put out a tweet saying, this is not good. As in, I think China said, we are willing to pay any price to win the trade war with America. So it's sort of like an arms race in reverse. You know, I'm going to cut my nose off to spite my face or whatever.
Pretty dangerous.
So, yeah, I think yesterday they were saying how they were going for the soya. So from what I understand, China likes soya, and they need it for their children, and they need it for their pigs, and they need it so that their children can eat pigs and stuff like that. So, I mean, diet. So apparently soya is grown in parts of America that vote for Trump, and it was interpreted as it's a very direct sort of message to Trump voters. But the list is apparently at least 100 on each side of products they're now going to put massive taxes on. So in the same way that, what's his name, Donald Trump used to call Kim of North Korea Rocket Man, etc., and my button's bigger than yours, and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. But then afterwards, now they're friends, aren't they? I mean, they're actually having a loving, aren't they, South Korea and North Korea? They're actually going to unite. So, or something like that. So if that's going on, then is all of this talk just talk? And
in terms of the trade war?
Yeah, is this just talk and they're just going to drop it any minute? Because the stock market has been going up and down like a yo-yo because everyone believes it and they go, well, it's only kidding.
Well, you noticed the MoneyGram transaction, didn't you, earlier?
Please explain.
So which company was it that tried to buy them? Was it
Alibaba?
Alibaba tried to buy MoneyGram.
Who are Alibaba?
Alibaba are an e-commerce website and also data harvesting.
Chinese eBay,
essentially. And they've expanded hugely. I mean, I think they recently did an event that was all based around discounts on their website, and it was like one of the biggest sales in China. So they've basically created a new commercial event that is hideously successful. It's like we might have here, they do Blue Monday, where they want everyone to buy holidays or something like that.
Okay, so it's social engineering as well, because they've got the social credit, which is another thing that we can talk about another day.
And who knows? I think they were getting different discounts to different people.
Okay, so why are we talking about Alibaba?
So they tried to buy MoneyGram, and that was blocked because Trump blocked it on grounds of national security.
So MoneyGram is kind of financial services. I mean, I walked past the post office the other day and it was MoneyGram. So this is money transfers globally. Okay, so big Chinese firm tries to buy a US sort of financial services firm, okay, and it got blocked.
That's right.
And this is by the CFIUS or something like that, isn't it? I think I can't remember what it stands for, but it basically is for foreign mergers. They said no, fine.
And it happens again.
And then you tweeted me afterwards, and I was like, oh my God, I'm a shook one. What was the tweet that you sent me afterwards?
Well, this was after the second time it happened. So there was another, I can't remember what project it was. And Trump blocked another deal again, basically, because China was involved in the 5G network at the top, who were managing this system. So he blocked another deal. And then, days later, up pops a story that Alibaba, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, joining ALEC. Now, who's ALEC?
The American Legislative Exchange Council. What's going on? Hold on a second. I mean, because ALEC is a story in itself. But,
it is, yeah.
So I don't know, where do we start? I mean, this is fucked. So what's going on?
So the American Legislative Exchange Council are essentially a really powerful corporate lobbying group in America. They claim to put out 1,000 legislations every year and 20% of them to be adopted by senators. So essentially they work on changing America in the shape and the interests of their donors. And
they've got corporate members. And I know some people left because
people
of the
like Pfizer, private prison systems, big food. So
Starbucks, all this kind of stuff.
Exactly.
So some of them left, didn't they? Because people said these guys are evil. And so then afterwards, for PR reasons, they left. Some.
Well, yeah, it will be PR reasons.
But Alibaba don't need to worry about that.
But they've let in this Chinese data giant, who's going to... And essentially, if you want to describe ALEC, they help ghostwrite American laws. And now China have paid the membership fee. Is that how easy it is to join up?
Well,
And
it's
they're
interesting.
quite happy to have them there.
Well, I mean, I'd like to argue that there's a difference between Alibaba and the Chinese government, but apparently you can't be big as a business in China if you're not a paid up member of the Communist Party. And so obviously Jack Ma, he's managed to negotiate it. So Jack Ma runs Alibaba. And he's managed to sort of sort everything out so that he's huge. Apparently also, I don't know if I tweeted you this today, but there's a company called Babylon. Some people may have seen advertisements for them in public transport. So they're kind of digital GP service,
Right.
where if you need to have an appointment with the GP, this is in the UK, you can just use Babylon app. And have you not heard about this?
I didn't
I'm sure
know.
we've discussed this. So Babylon is run by Ali Parsar, who used to run a Circle. He's ex-Goldman Sachs, Iranian guy. He used to run Circle, and I think they got Hinchinbrook Hospital for the
Right,
NHS, and it
right.
went bankrupt.
Yeah.
Our friend, Dr. Lucy Reynolds, was on Newsnight in 2012. She looked him in the face and she said, your project will go bankrupt. You know, it's just not going to work.
And it did.
And 3 or 4 years later, she was vindicated. But
Completely asset stripping project that was, skeleton staff, reduced all the spending that they put in there, and then the amount that they'd left it in debt meant that we were picking up not just the bill of fixing the hospital, but also the bill of debt that they'd left, because
Right.
they had a maximum, they had like a limit on how much debt they were allowed to be responsible for, which is incredible.
all right, well, check this. He's got a new project, Babylon, and I read today, I thought this was quite unbelievable. They've just done a deal with, you know how we just said BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. So Tencent is run by a computer programmer, just like Zuckerberg, called Pony Ma, a multi-billionaire. Babylon, run by this ex-Goldman guy, Ali Parsar, with investors such as the gentleman from DeepMind, they have done a deal with Tencent to do health on WeChat, which is their messaging service. So that means they've got 1 billion people's health requests to mine as machine learning data. So, I mean, they were already in the UK, but they've just done that deal. So when David Cameron was doing this UK-China fund, we've discussed this with Lord Chadlington.
Yeah.
I thought that he was trying to sell the NHS to China.
Yeah.
But it looks like UK firms are actually getting access to the Chinese market. Oh, at least Chinese data.
Wow.
Surveillance capitalism.
Wow.
Free movement of data.
We've had Hinchinbrook, now have China.
Yeah, well, the first one failed, but this was not going to fail at all, is it? I mean, that's a big business. So I think we said we were going to go half an hour. So I could have another rant about anything right now. But where should we go next? Because we've done the Falciani data story. Now, have you seen how data seems to be everywhere that we go with our questioning?
It's interesting because we've just talked about data being everywhere, and yet the first story, the Trade Secrets Act, is all about making sure that there is no data to do with companies.
Yeah, good point. So it's one set of rules for one set of people and another
Be
one for another.
transparent. Privacy's over. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Let these companies help you. Don't talk about those companies, though.
Yeah, another thing that I've noticed this week during my little forays to the newsagent and reading the Daily Mail is
Glorious.
2 stories. One is on British passports. They have this massive campaign on blue passports, and they're saying, how can a French-Dutch company have this contract? And, just because they're charging 120 million less, blah, 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 we would pay, essentially we would pay more for our passports.
They handed in a petition.
Yeah,
I
because
believe.
it's British. Yeah, I don't know if they've handed it in yet, but it's about 300,000. I wonder who will hand that in, if they'll get Rees-Mogg to do it. So there's all that. By the way, Assange met up with Farage this morning, didn't he? Farage went to Julian Assange's flat next to Harrods, the Ecuadorian embassy. And that's weird.
It's a bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah. And then also, what was the other thing? Yeah, so you've got this passport story going on, blue
Right.
passports. And so they've got this petition, but they said we can sign these free trade deals. So free trade means we sign deals based on them being deals. But if you have a petition for that, this is what I wanted to say. So the whole thing about anti-Semitism at the moment in the Labour Party and the mural from 2012 in East London. So that's an image which has got Illuminati references and Jewish bankers and non-Jewish bankers and 2 people who also, I assume, are pure sort of stereotype elder Jewish people. Protocols of the Elders of Zion, I think, is the name of the fake book that went around 150 years ago, talking about that sort of thing. You've got that actual image on a wall. But there's another merger going on, which is between GKN Melrose. So GKN is an engineering firm that made Spitfires, and Melrose is a British asset stripping firm. And apparently GKN, some of their shares were bought by Elliott Associates, American vulture funds, distressed debt guys. And what I found so funny last week was the Daily Mail were there saying these are corporate hyenas, they're vultures,
They said
financial
it was an
terrorists,
abuse of capitalism.
an abuse of capitalism, financial terrorists, all of these different things. And then they show the photos and you see these Jewish guys from New York in the pictures. And so the imagery and the language that they're doing is drawing from exactly the same space as what they said the image in East London was drawing from.
Wow.
And the editorial, the first story, they actually say financial terrorists talking about Elliott Associates. And the next one, they talk about Corbyn's anti-Semitism with no awkwardness about that. Yeah, they were actually doing that. And I'm very happy to stick my screenshots of that up and point in that direction. I mean, okay, so there's hypocrisy and, everything's sort of a bit pointing the wrong way. But I mean, that was really amazing. What I find funny about all of this is that you've got, are we going to have a petition every time a foreign company wants to buy something in Britain? And what kind of controlled capitalism is this? So if you're a nationalist and you want controlled capitalism, that is actually fascist. That's the full-on nationalism, flag-waving, and kind of wanting a controlled capitalism. So that's why they're so close to Bannon and Le Pen and everything like that, because they really are pushing exactly the same thing. And then they accuse...
I think that's what the Daily Mail are going for.
I don't think they can help it. It's the logic has dictated that they have to do that. What's also funny is that Alex Brummer, he's ex-Guardian, the editor of the business section. And it's amazing how they fall into these types of traps. And you have to... I mean, I like the fact that we're called amusing ourselves to death, because it's, that far down the line that you have to realise, by the way, this is what's happening whilst we play with our toys. I think that was my Jerry Springer moment there.
Your final thoughts?
Yeah, well, what are your final thoughts at the moment? Where are we going? What's going on? And what are you up to next week? In
What
terms
am I
of
up to next week?
Public appearance from Cam?
Yep, I'll be speaking at LSE on Tuesday for an event where Chris Hughes, who's a Facebook founder, he has written a book called Fair Shot, Rethinking Inequality. And he's basically talking about why the 1% should pay for a basic income or some kind of guaranteed income. And I read his book last week. It's interesting. He's kind of capping it and saying it should be about $500 a month, which to me is de-radicalizing the idea of a universal basic income, because I think it should be enough for you to live on. But I'll be speaking at that event on 10th of April. Bev Skeggs will be there, Natalie Fenton and Chris Hughes. Yeah.
Oh, let's keep going. Come on then, tell me a bit more about what your thoughts are on basic income.
It is a difficult one. At the moment, I think it's being... Right, so the people who are pushing it are Silicon Valley people and a lot of billionaires. Richard Branson, should we really be listening to this guy about inequality? He's a tax exile who has got his hand in our NHS. And he...
But that's not enough of a reason.
No, I know.
Just
no,
because
you're correct, but I also think we should have a healthy amount of skepticism when a bunch of billionaires tell us how to solve inequality.
That's well put. Okay, but get to the point, though. What is the point? Because, I agree, that is something to be worried about, but where's the catch?
I think, essentially, because of the way that we think about basic income, because of the whole idea, I think it's a good idea in terms of the fact that we need to delineate wages from work and from hourly work, because we're moving into a new age where, we have to prepare for automation. And in all of our heads, didn't we think that when we would have the capabilities for robots and all these things to help us, did we think that, what we would do is let everyone just die or suffer or not exist without jobs? We didn't think that the world that we were creating would harm people when they start losing their jobs. So I think it's a good idea. And also because unearned income is only a phenomenon for people who are working class, essentially. I mean, unearned income in the world is far more...
What is unearned income?
Has far more of an effect.
What does...
What does it mean?
I'm sorry, I'm already lost. Yeah.
Okay. Unearned income is basically income that doesn't come from you going out and working 5 hours today. Now, what we've seen for people who have less money, we've seen 0-hour contracts. So we've seen that intensify even more. So not only are you only getting paid by the hour, but they'll come in and bring you in for 4 hours and tell you to go home so they don't have to pay you for a break, right? So we've seen that happen more intensely.
Okay, so sorry to cut you up. I think that what you're telling me is that the current version of capitalism suffers from so many distortions that it actually doesn't work in terms of... I mean, I remember when Gordon Brown brought in working tax credits, I sort of was about 20 and I read about it. And I remember thinking, okay, so the reason why he's doing that is because we need people to do those jobs, but they're not getting enough. So we're going to top everything up so that the work gets done. And in a way, what's his name, George Osborne, when he said, right, we're going to have a minimum wage of £9 an hour by 2020 or something like that. That was him saying, yeah, we've got to make everyone pay the right amount, and basically stealing a Labour policy. But what you're talking about is it more the labour market is dysfunctional, and we want dignity.
Yeah, but also that basically the reason it's being promoted as something that's radical, but it's only radical for working people and people on low incomes, because in Britain, for example, a majority of the money comes from house price rises. That's not people going out and working. So someone whose house price goes up in a year can probably earn more than someone going out and working 40 hours a week at a minimum wage job. That's unearned income that is actually, driving our economy at the moment.
Is that part of what Chris was talking about in his book?
No.
Where are you getting all this from then?
These are my personal thoughts, because the reasons...
This is good. This is good stuff. Say it.
The reasons that people think that basic income is radical when, the rich have a lot of unearned income. They make loads of money without doing much. They're able to avoid tax. They're able to stash it away in tax shelters and tax havens. So the idea that it's radical to me is it's not radical. Giving people money and letting them do what they want with it is not radical. So to break that idea down, I think it's important. But the problem comes from the fact that for example, the American Enterprise Institute, which is another kind of corporate lobbying firm that's had a lot of effects on laws in the US and a lot of influence, they said that the new social contract should be a universal basic income and total deregulation. Now that is going to be a cost to people. That's not giving people the basic things that they need to live. And they've kind of crowbarred this
So the
whole
good
thing.
part is you get enough to live. And then what does total deregulation mean?
That means getting rid of all safety rules, any laws that protects people, any liability that companies have. Basically the end game, after we're seeing this law that we're adopting into UK policy of trade secrets, the end game is to allow corporations to have total rights to do whatever they want.
So you get enough.
We will get a small payoff of $6,000 or $7,000.
So you get enough credit to play the video game.
Yeah.
But the prices of everything go up.
Yeah, and that means that it's also what
the game becomes harder to play.
What these companies want is access to our public services, right? They want all those services privatized. Now, for example, if Chris Hughes gives me $500 a month, but I lose the NHS, which is being privatized as we speak, and the level of efficiency and care and its ability to run is being degraded. If two people in my family get cancer and I happen to have lapsed on my health insurance and now I'm not insured, that $500 means nothing to me. So having an NHS is far more has far more worth. So all these public services the protection of those public services should come with the basic income, and the basic income should be enough to live on.
How are we going to get this conversation going on? Because you've got some good ideas, but then when it comes to discussing them further with people who might have a chance of implementing policy, I think there's a bit of a problem going on. We were involved in filming the exhibition the other day, weren't we, in Parliament, the People versus PFI, about PFI. Yeah. I watched it afterwards and I listened to it and I thought, oh my God, these ideas are great. And then when I watched it, I thought, oh my God, this is really boring. This is a problem.
It is a problem.
I think... Yeah, sorry, please continue.
Well, the thing about public-private partnerships. So we're basically allowing...
oh, sorry, yeah, I didn't explain any of this stuff. Yeah, so what is a PFI? What is a PPP?
So PFIs were used as a way of paying for the upfront costs of building a school or a hospital or any other kind of public infrastructure we need. And now that was rolled out heavily over the kind of 90s and under Tony Blair's new Labour government.
Right.
So now we have about 700 of them. A National Audit Office report in January revealed that we pay, I think it's 70% more than the actual cost of a hospital for it to be publicly financed and 40% more for schools. So everywhere we are just losing money, right? We are losing money in the long term because these contracts run 25, 30 years. Now, on top of that, there's all these weird other things that these companies can do to extract more money. I think in Private Eye, they were talking about a contract in Birmingham to do with roadworks, right? Keeping the roads clean and keeping them up to scratch and the conditions. And the company decided to reinterpret the contract so that it meant that they didn't have to deal with any new roads that were built in the area, and that they would charge you a penalty or they could charge you an extra amount if they had to do it. Now, when Carillion collapsed earlier this year, that was a really, really kind of obvious surface level, like all these kind of financial instruments that had been going on and been, had put their tentacles in all of our infrastructure. Suddenly we were looking at it. And Carillion was involved in PFIs. And Howard Davies from RBS was on Question Time, and he said that PFI committed a fraud on the people. And we have loads of people who are saying this, but loads of people who are saying that these contracts are ridiculous.
So what are we going to do about it?
But what are we going to do about it?
I'm asking you.
And here's where it stops. Well, at that People versus PFI event, now Labour...
People versus PFI, okay, an organisation that we know, yeah.
Yeah. John McDonnell was talking about their plans to renationalise it, to renationalise these contracts. And he's coming up against people who are like, oh, it's going to cost so much money to do it. Obviously ridiculous because it costs so much money.
To buy out the contracts.
To buy out the contracts.
So these are expensive contracts written essentially by fairly greedy lawyers, etc. And so the money's all going offshore.
Yeah.
And so John McDonnell is saying...
Who's going to jail?
I was going to get that line in. All right, so...
if there is a fraud committed on this scale across the entire public, and we are going to be paying...
Cam, you're stealing my thunder.
We are going to be paying this for the next 20 years.
Why
We're projected
IRAT?
to spend £200 billion in the next 20 years. But the reaction of the government, despite Jeremy Hunt saying that PFIs are, like a stone around the NHS's neck, despite Boris Johnson saying that in other countries we would call this looting, but here we call it the PPP. The reaction is that it's a contract and we have to carry on paying these people who have essentially plundered our services. And
Cam,
of course, none of that information...
Cam, you're so worthy, honestly.
None of that money is going back into
all right,
public
Cam,
services.
Listen.
Oh, all right. Oh,
no, I'm just jealous. I wanted to get that point in first.
We have talked about it.
All right, so fine. When we organised that interview with John McDonnell that I conducted a year and a half ago.
It was a very good
interview. Which very few people have watched. But I remember saying to him something along the lines of, what's going on with sending people to jail? When I spoke to him before, I definitely just was straight up about it. And he sort of hedged and he didn't really say anything. I understand the definition of a tyranny is when the leader of the country decides who goes to jail. So, okay, fine. I'm okay with him not deciding that people go to jail. And, he did say, there'll be legal cases if fraud is proven. But the policy that he seems to be saying at the moment is we'll issue bonds, we'll buy out the PFIs, and then afterwards we'll renegotiate the rates on the debt. And that's it. And I don't remember him saying anything about the definition of corruption, from what I understand, one of them, abuse of power, another one, an act or a series of acts, none of which on their own is necessarily illegal, but when viewed from a distance is seen to conspire against the public trust. And that's blatantly what's been going on here in a huge way. So somewhere along the line, why is it that this is just being, we're just being told, austerity cuts, bail out RBS, bail out this, that and the other, Carillion. So it's not good enough from him. I'm sorry, I don't like it. I just think it's weak. Is he trying to placate the city? Is he trying to placate the media?
At the same time,
weak.
At the same time, the city is kind of preparing. There was an article in the FT where they were talking. Was it the CBI that were basically expressing their concerns that Labour, if they interfere, they call it interference interference
from the government.
This is
right?
what they call an interference in private contracts is really the worst thing you can do, because they're suggesting that it would not bode well. It would be bad for business. They wouldn't view the UK as a good thing.
Well, I think they're right. I think they're right in principle that the government should stay out of a lot of this stuff. But the thing is that if it's contracts that have been signed by the government, and the government have mysteriously got people who don't know what they're doing signing the contracts, who then go off and work for these companies. Mate, what about Andrew Neil? Sorry for the segue.
Quite a segue.
Yeah, what about him? I mean, this is public-private, isn't it? Andrew Neil. Well, I just found out that he runs The Spectator and The Telegraph.
Chair of The Spectator.
Yeah, so this guy's chairing The Spectator and The Telegraph, the most rampant right-wing organisations going on. With James Delingpole, who works for Breitbart, he's got a Spectator column, and he retweets Tommy Robinson and Katie Hopkins. This is serious. I mean, basically, these guys are kind of on the Nazi tip. And when I listen to the podcast with Isabel Hardman and James Forsyth and these people, I think you're the younger people who are sort of, hi, I'm not racist, but I'm going to bend over backwards to make Theresa May look good.
Yeah.
I sort of think, you can't be trusted. But then again, your boss is Andrew Neil. And I didn't realise quite how bad he was. My dad once told me, there's not many people who I don't like. I don't like Andrew Neil. And I never really fully got it.
He had a kind of a moment of sanity when the Corbyn spy story was going on. He kind of really took Steve Baker to task, which was great. It kind of punctured this weird story that was having loads and loads of coverage in the news. But he is quite a strange character in terms of the fact that loads of people are asking about how do these impartiality rules, how does he follow those things? I mean, and if he
just makes it up as he goes along.
Yeah. What are the rules?
He's just aggressive.
Is it okay to be on the chair of some things that aren't impartial? Like, where are the lines? Because you have a woman being sacked for she got sacked, right, for talking about the gender pay gap. But then you've got
Where?
I think so, because they said if you
BBC?
express impartiality, yeah. So she'd spoken out about an issue.
You talk about the one who worked in China because she resigned, didn't she?
Oh, okay, sorry, but no, someone definitely got told off.
Right.
Or,
for being political.
Yeah. But then this whole thing, Andrew Neil, who's a long-time veteran of the BBC.
Well, Nicholas Wilson the other day, he did a tweet. He's the HSBC whistleblower who we've interviewed many times. He put out a tweet with Andrew Neil's declarations of interests, the different people that he's worked for in 2017.
It's quite a long
list.
list.
Just all banks. I mean, just so many different financial interests. That was unbelievable. I didn't realise. I mean, obviously, I shouldn't have been surprised.
Some of these are speaking gigs, right? But then,
but look at who he's speaking for, and look at who he's able to entertain. But what I wanted to say was that, the Telegraph, they did the story about the George Soros trying to take over Britain secret meeting.
Yeah.
And that was totally anti-Semitic.
Of course it was.
Totally. That was, never seen anything play to the idea that there's three people controlling the world and they're all Jews than that.
Yeah.
And he's then just...
feeding into the conspiracy of this very rich Jewish guy.
Is this not coming from this school of Surkov? Now, I don't know much about Surkov, but this is Vladimir Putin's PR guy.
Yeah.
That Adam Curtis sometimes talking about. Isn't this where we're going to lie to you, we're going to tell you the truth, and we're going to tell you in advance that we're going to do both, and you're not going to be able to tell the difference, and then afterwards you're just going to get micro-targeted by Facebook for your vote, amusing ourselves to death.
Well, neatly, The Telegraph is also obviously the publication where Peter Oborne stepped down in 2015 because they refused to have any coverage of HSBC and some of the stories that he was finding out and the leaks and stuff, because they're one of their biggest advertisers. So a lovely little circle that we've drawn around this episode here.
Yeah, I suppose we better slow down because obviously things are getting a bit, we're probably not making any sense anymore. All right, well, thank you for listening. This has been Amusing Ourselves to Death. See you next time.
Bye.